Welcome back to another exciting year, a new season of Break Fake Rules. This is our little show where we try to challenge the fake rules that prevent social change, especially in the foundation world and in philanthropy. And today, I can't think of a better couple of guests to start us off in this new season. We have Heather Lofthouse and Robert Reich from Inequality Media, one of my favorite sources of information. And we just feel so honored that the two of you would join us for this opening episode of Season 2 of Break Fake Rules. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Glenn.
So let's get started. Why don't you tell us very quickly, very briefly about Inequality Media? Why did you start this? And I'll start with you, Robert, and then Heather, I'd love to hear your views as well.
Well, Heather is the executive director. She calls the shots. She is the boss. But I co-founded it with a filmmaker named Jake Kornbluth. We had done a couple of films together, but the real inspiration was my son, Sam Reich. Sam has been doing social media for many, many, many years. And he came up to me, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, and he said, Dad, if you really want to reach my generation, this is not to dump on your books. I mean, your books are fine, and I appreciate and respect your desire to write books. But if you want to reach, my generation, you've got to go into video and social media. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I mentioned it to Jake, and Jake and I did some research, and we decided that we really did need to do something that was completely different from either film or the books that I was writing. Hence, Inequality Media.
And along came Heather. You have been the executive director for some time.
Mm-hmm, that's it. I was on the board before that. And exactly, we want to use digital content, and that's broadly defined now, to show exactly what's happening in terms of inequality in America and what's happening to democracy, which is related to inequality. And that kind of focus has shifted over time, but it's even more important that we are on social media today than it was when we were founded a decade ago. I mean, this is an incredibly important time to be getting the truth out and to use these platforms where so many people are consuming information and news and fake news, frankly. So that's where we are, and we're proud to be doing it.
So in the philanthropy world, in the foundation world, we follow a lot of rules that are not laws. We just follow them mostly because we really want to center the power of the donor and everything that happens in the foundation sector. They are in control. And I wonder, in media or in narrative, either one, media, of course, is reporting narrative. What are some of the fake rules that you noticed, in addition to the fact that you needed to stop focusing on books? But what other fake rules did you notice that led you to this place with Inequality Media, and perhaps even more so to addressing inequality?
Well, let me start. Inequality has been increasing in the United States dramatically over the last 40 years. And as inequality has increased, more and more power and wealth have gone to the very top. So a lot of people, even 10 years ago, were intimidated. A lot of groups were intimidated by the power and wealth at the top. They just didn't want to, poke the bear. They didn't want to get in trouble. And it has become far more important, even than it was 10 years ago, for people to cause good trouble, to poke the bear, to be courageous, to take on the powers that are now dominating America. And I'm talking about the oligarchy.
And how do you address it through Inequality Media? You're obviously poking the bear. That must be your daily plan.
We're poking the bear. That's right, Heather. I poke the bear, and Heather pokes the bear, and we have we've got 9 other people, terrific people who are great bear pokers.
I mean, basically, we undertake what's we would call a nesting dolls approach. We say the same thing a lot. And I think a lot of organizations feel the need to invent new things constantly. Now, I'm not saying we're not innovative. I'm not saying we're not nimble and don't adjust and pivot constantly. We do. But I think in messaging, saying the same thing over and over again in different ways or not in different ways, and testing and continuing to keep going with the same thing over literally years for us. And I think a lot of people are scared to do that. A lot of people feel like we can't be saying the same thing that we said a year ago in exactly the same way with the same video. And if it's still getting significant engagement, including with new audiences, we keep reposting and we keep driving attention to it. So that's something. I think some of the key lessons in what we really do is provide people with frameworks to understand what is happening to them. And we tie the daily news, which really is daily or minutely, to these frameworks. Bob, do you want to talk about some of the frameworks that you've been talking about for years? Favorite frameworks?
Sure. Heather, the obvious big framework is that power and wealth are intimately connected. If you have centralized power in the form of let's say just randomly a president who is consolidating power in the White House, and you also simultaneously have wealth concentrating in the hands of, let's say, for example, 640 billionaires, there is an opportunity, unfortunately, for society for having that wealth and power commingle, undermining democracy and making it harder for the average person to get ahead. Because the rules of the game become tilted, become corrupted in a way. A lot of people believe that there's something called the free market that exists outside of politics and outside of everything else. Well, there is not a free market that exists outside politics. The rules of the market, the actual rules of the free market, are every day being determined by political forces. So these are the kinds of things that, as Heather says, we have emphasized. We don't emphasize it in exactly the same way. We try to connect the dots. We try to use what's going on in current events that people are concerned about. But we do emphasize the same broad theme. In fact, even before the Trump administration, we were saying, watch out, because if wealth and power become too concentrated, we are asking for a demagogue.
I want to just kind of shift over just a slight bit to what I think is, in a way, a myth that exists in our country, that it feels very real, and it is polarity. But I was listening after the election, the day after the election, and both parties had almost the same message in this polarized world. And it was, we are the party of the working class, and we are here to fight the other side's billionaires. Both said the same thing. And what was interesting to me is it seems as though if there is polarity in the United States, it's one group of billionaires taking on another group of billionaires and the associated teams coming along.
Glenn, you are exactly right. And this is one of the points we try to make. The Republican Party is a party of billionaires. The Democratic Party is a party of billionaires. Both parties have turned their backs on the working class. Now, in terms of my political values, I think the Democrats have done a much better job than Republicans. But the fact of the matter is that as inequality has increased and wealth has concentrated at the top, a lot of that money at the top has gone to both parties and corrupted both parties and corrupted our democracy.
And so why is it that, in your opinion, there's a narrative that both parties are putting out? What is it about the MAGA narrative that drew in what is clearly the new majority in the electoral world, which is the non-college educated voter? Apparently, the non-college educated voter really drove, and this is a multiracial bloc, multi-ethnic bloc. What is appealing about the narrative of MAGA to that now majority bloc, or plurality bloc? Is still 49.8.
I think it's important to keep in mind, just parenthetically, that Donald Trump won by 1.5%, the smallest margin this century. It's really not a mandate. But to your question, I think that the real big movement here, and I saw it start in the 1980s, 90s, really is anti-establishment. And that anti-establishment movement produced both the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement. It produced Bernie Sanders' candidacy as well as Donald Trump's candidacy. It is the most powerful force in America right now, because a lot of people feel justifiably that the game is rigged against them. And it is.
And at the same time, that the machine that is driving the vote is funded by the billionaires, as we talked about earlier. So how do we crack this dynamic?
Well, I think instead of, and I'll let Heather take this on in a moment, I just think it's very important. We don't begin with saying we're Republican or we're Democrat, or we are for Trump or we're for the major Democratic spokespeople. We don't begin on that level. We begin on the level of what you individually are experiencing and what you need. In terms of economics, it's kitchen table economics. It's what's happening to your wages and your job and prices. In terms of politics, it's what's happening in your community and what you actually perceive in terms of your own power or lack of power in your community or even on your job. That's where people are. That's where people live. That's what they're receptive to. Instead of the big labels, we go really to the world that people live in. Heather?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's a reason it's called explainer videos. I mean, that is what we do. We are trying to explain to people the bigger trends and exactly what's happening. We're trying to do it incredibly quickly because the rate at which truth and non-truth moves through, the internet these days. So we are on every platform. One video we put out this week has over 1 million views on TikTok, which is so important for getting to younger people. We just hit number 26 on Blue Sky. So there was this big movement from Twitter towards Blue Sky around the election, and our team was incredibly fast getting our content up immediately. So I think trying to get the truth out through compelling content as quickly as possible and explaining that their billionaires are on both sides. But these are the policies that need to be taken advantage of. And these are the policies that we've recently had wins on, and what the data is that show what exactly worked. I mean, it's this constant game of, in the midst of all this other noise, getting out what we see as the truth in a way that people hear and they take it. I mean, educating people with data is not easy. You have to appeal to their intellects, their hearts, and this is what we try to do through static content, just posts and words, and also through the moving image, through bespoke motion graphics, and through video.
So let me ask you this as we kind of close out here. Are you hopeful? How do you stay hopeful, if you are hopeful?
Oh, I'm very hopeful. What's
the
option, Glenn? Well, first of all, if you're not hopeful, what are you gonna go around and mope and be angry and put your fist through a wall?
No, sometimes people see me doing that around these hallways. I try not to.
Well, I would much rather be hopeful. But secondly, I look at history, particularly in the United States, and I see a very resilient democracy overcoming oligarchy. I mean, we had the first Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century. We overcame that. Before then, in the 1840s, we also had huge concentration of wealth and political power, and we overcame that. And we, in the 1930s, we had the forces of fascism trying to compete with Franklin D. Roosevelt. Well, we overcame that as well. Henry Wallace, vice president of FDR, he warned about American fascism. We have a history in which we have been dealing with this problem. And dealing with it in great waves and dealing with it successfully. And I have very great confidence, and this is where truth-telling comes in, that if we do it well and truth-tell, and if people know what's going on, we will do the right thing. Heather?
I would say, yeah, part of it is, I mean, I'm working with Bob, and so that kind of rubs off that if he's hopeful, then I'm going to be hopeful for that minute too. But I do think I want to be an anti-cynic, right? We watch people use cynicism, similar to what we were saying about fear earlier, right? And I don't want to fall prey to that. And I don't want others to fall prey to that. And so how do we point out where there is cynicism, how it's breeding, and the number of people up to 19 million that stayed home who had voted for Biden and then didn't vote in the last election. Thinking about how people are feeling and what they're feeling and figuring I want to help those people better understand it. And I think I also have a young child, and he keeps me thinking, yep, better keep fighting. And what Bob said, and this is not a comment on your age, Bob, but keeping the long view in mind, right? Looking at what has happened and what humans are capable of, I think is critically important. Not to say we are not going to feel low and that people aren't suffering. Let's be really clear about that. But I do think trying to stay hopeful is very important in the daily fight that we're all in.
I think that's great advice. I have noticed over the last few months amongst my peers in the foundation sector, there's a level of panic based on what could happen versus what is happening. And even if you play out all the scenarios, some of these threatening scenarios to progressive leaders and otherwise, it's the long view that I think we have to stay focused on, because if you get too caught up in the short stuff, it can really be distracting and disruptive to the efforts you're trying to make over the long haul. So I appreciate that. How do people find Inequality Media? What are the various you have a lot of products. What are we looking for? Are we on TikTok with the kids? What are we going? Where do we find you?
We're everywhere. So we inequalitymedia.org is the fastest way. And then we have imcivicaction.org is our C4 website. But Bob, as our co-founder, is often co-posting with us. So anywhere you find RB Reich on Twitter and everywhere else. I mean, we are everywhere. YouTube, Blue Sky, Threads, Notes.
Wow.
Name it. We were on
I don't even know half
Mastodon.
of what you just said. I don't even know half of what you're talking about.
Right.
I don't either.
We are on all the platforms. Yeah.
And Substack. Don't forget Substack.
Well, thank you two so much for joining us here on Break Fake Rules. This is the first episode of our season. Some said it could never be done that we get a second season together, but we did it, and here we are. And thanks to you for joining us on this first one, and thank you for all that you've shared today.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you for the invite and for pressing us to answer these important questions.
My pleasure. Hope we do it again sometime. Thank you for tuning in to Break Fake Rules. Subscribe to the Stupski Foundation YouTube channel to watch videos of each episode, and join the conversation with me on LinkedIn.